Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and what I wanted to do in this video was to actually cover the Q&A update on the new Polaris ship that we got from CIG last night. Now, the ship was initially slated to be 155 meters long in the brochure, but the stats page, which is often misquoted, was at 130 meters long. CIG confirms that the ship is 155 meters long, and they actually updated the stats page accordingly to make sure that we knew that was going to be the case. So, outside of that, we get a question here, and a couple are involving the Hangar, as you might expect. And one of them was actually asking if the Polaris comes with a snub-nosed fighter or a Argo or something like that. And the answer was no. And the primary reason for that was the purpose of that Hangar is for you to actually be able to bring a fighter along with you. So they didn't want to just toss in a snub-nosed craft when you could actually have like your Saber or something like that actually fit in the Hangar. Now, they do also go on to say that anything smaller than a Saber, including the Saber, would actually fit in the Hangar, and that 2 Merlins would be okay, but it would be tight. Now, that's a little bit alarming, because when I look at the ship and I see the size of that Hangar, it seems quite a bit bigger than that. So just having a Saber in there, while the Saber is a hell of a fighter, and you could obviously fit a Super Hornet or something like that in there too, I was expecting something a little bit bigger. You know, the ability to actually bring a Cutlass along, which would maybe give you the ability to have like a drop ship or a search and rescue craft, or, you know, all the different things you could actually end up doing with a Cutlass. You may be a little bit more restricted than I thought you were going to be initially using this ship as far as what you can put in there. Now, the real question, I think, comes down to how they're measuring what's going to fit, because what really appears to be the limiting factor with that Hangar is the width of the Hangar. The other thing, and I guess the reason for that is the platform raises up to allow the ship to launch, and then the doors kind of slide off to the sides, and they don't necessarily open all the way. So the length is always going to be maxed out, but if you've got a wider ship, you're going to have a hard time getting out of the Hangar, and I think that's why we're seeing something like the Saber actually being kind of the max size that you can fit in there. Now, like with anything with CIG and talking about Star Citizen, there's not arbitrary restrictions that are going to be in place. So anything that you can fit in there can work. But the question is, what can fit and what should fit? Because technically you can end up launching while this thing's actually flying, but if you have to really carefully navigate yourself out, like let's say you can somehow fit a Cutlass in there, but you have to kind of go in sideways and then pivot down, and then, you know, if you're getting into combat and you need to deploy that ship, you're not going to want to leave your Polaris just sitting there, so you can carefully slide out your Cutlass to go get into battle. Now, we also get confirmation that you can technically launch out of the Hangar without having to raise the platform, which is good news, but that comes with the caveat that it's actually going to be complicated for ships like the Saber to land or take off, because it does have retractable wings when it lands. It touches down and then the wings come in. And the Super Hornet, and actually the Hornet, does that as well. So if you've got a ship that's really kind of at the maximum size, you're going to want to really make sure that you're raising that platform so you're landing with the most space available, then getting tucked in for night, and you're getting dropped into the Hangar. Now, you can technically launch while in motion, but it is going to be dangerous. You know, if you're talking about a Polaris hauling ass on an attack run, the second your ship leaves the platform, you're going to have to get out of the way of the back of that Hangar, because it may just collide into you. Whenever you are not touching the ship anymore, you're free flying. So you either need to really be careful and coordinate with your pilot, or you need to make sure that your Polaris is slowing down or really coming to a stop to help facilitate that ship actually getting out. Now, I think the other thing that we can kind of glean from this is that it kind of confirms what I said in the previous video, was that I think one of the positions on this ship is going to be kind of like a flight room or hangar room operator that's going to help with opening the hangar doors, guiding people in, lowering, communicating with the pilot of the Polaris, those types of things. One of the questions that was asked was about how torpedoes are going to act in-game. And while this isn't specific to the Polaris, I think it is good information, because the Polaris is going to be fairly reliant on that torpedo payload that it's bringing along. And they say that torpedoes are slower, they're less maneuverable than missiles, but they do come with a bigger payload, meaning that they do more damage and have a bigger radius. Now, different brands and different types of torpedo are going to change depending on what they are. For example, some are going to have different lock-on times, different levels of reliability. Some are going to be more resistant to countermeasures. And then outside of just the torpedo itself, The avionics that the Polaris has on board and the upgrades that you make are going to impact things like how well they track and how many different targets you can have at the same time and those sorts of things. So that's kind of an interesting mechanic, especially when you consider that faster and more agile ships like fighters could have an easier time evading torpedoes without actually needing to use countermeasures. So if you can upgrade your avionics to make you more effective in actually landing those shots, that would be helpful. But really, torpedoes are designed for big ships, like capital ships or big merchant vessels, and they even go on to mention installations. So being able to like crack a fortified wall to help with infiltration. Those types of things are pretty cool mechanics, but I think it also kind of harkens back to what torpedoes should actually be used for, because they're going to be really expensive. So you don't necessarily want to use a torpedo on a Merlin that's harassing you when you could just use one of your size 3 missiles that the ship is bringing, or turrets. You want to kind of be smart with how you end up using them. Now, we go on to talk about the Polaris and what its biggest targets are going to be and what its biggest threats are going to be. And the Polaris is really designed to go against big civilian ships and small to medium-sized cap ships. So take that to probably mean things like the Idris, as well as other Polarises and anything else that may come out. Now, the real purpose should be to get in quick, do your damage fast with the torpedoes, and get out of that situation. You don't want to necessarily just sit there and just take a pounding with the ship, because the main threat to this is capital class weaponry. And if you're engaging other capital ships, it becomes a very real problem for you to kind of sit there and deal with their defenses. The ship is fast, it's got decent shielding on it, and torpedoes, so you're going to be going on attack runs. You're not going to sit there and brawl it out. They say that fighter class weaponry isn't really that big of a concern for the Polaris based on its bigger shields and nice defenses. Now, a fighter might be able to make a dent, or a group of them may be able to make a dent in your shielding and armor, but would end up having to, leave, and it would probably leave them, I guess, exposed for too long, meaning that fighters engaging you alone would be really kind of at risk and wouldn't be a good situation. However, if they're bringing ships like Gladiators and Retaliators and Harbingers along, that's going to be your primary threat because they have the bigger weapons. Just like you're a torpedo boat going after bigger capital ships, Gladiators, bombers, those are going to be your torpedo threats coming to you. They go on to talk about if the Polaris is really designed with any other roles in mind, and they say that the loadout speed and characteristics make it a combat ship, really designed to do patrols, capital ship combat, as well as being really a high target escort, meaning that you're going to really be a nice deterrent. Yes, you could be, hauling a boatload of cargo with 2 whole E's, but if you've got a Polaris there, whoever's going to be attacking is going to have to deal with you before they can get to that. So from that purpose, having something like that puts a lot of influence on what you're able to actually do. That deterrent is going to be one of the biggest things in this game, because most people aren't going to want to fight all the time, because fighting is going to be expensive. You could die, you could lose your ships, you could just have to spend ammo. Most people are probably going to want to win engagements without having to fire a shot, and a ship like the Polaris can help you do that. Now, you could absolutely, there's no restrictions in place, use the Polaris to do things like cargo transport. It's got 216 SEU of cargo, which isn't a little bit. I mean, it's a decent amount of cargo. It's about half of a Caterpillar, to my knowledge, but it's not the most efficient way to do it. You're always going to be able to use a whole series and be more effective at hauling cargo and end up making more money. Now, they go on to say that this is a game and that they don't intend, for you to actually be using the Polaris and different capital ships. They don't want it to break you. But they do go on to kind of confirm what I had mentioned in the capital ship video, and that's warships don't make money. There's going to be ways to make money, but most of the time you're using this ship in conjunction with an operation that you're running. You shouldn't necessarily count on pulling the Polaris out of your dock and going to make a bunch of money by just using that ship. It is a support ship in a way because it's helping you facilitate your means to ending at a goal. Now, they do want to give you choices on how you can use your ships, but really anything outside of combat is more of a perk, and it kind of comes down to your own creativity and how you're going to use this ship. There was a question asking about the Polaris and if you could run it solo or with, an AI crew only. And you could technically take the Polaris out of dock solo. You don't need an NPC. But when it comes to actually fighting, you need really an AI crew at the minimum to be even slightly effective. And those are going to come with a cost as well. And if you get better NPCs, they're going to come with a greater cost. Now, when you think about this ship, when you start talking about crew requirements, you've got 5-man turrets, you've got, pilot, co-pilot, auto turret person, you've got pilot for the fighter on board. You've got the hangar room operator. You've got the torpedo room operator. It's not a small ship with small crew requirements. So you really need to be prepared to either spend the money to get AI or to bring your org mates along and have a good time together. But you really don't want to put a ship that costs this much at risk by doing stupid things like trying to pimp out your Polaris on your own. And then finally, the last question that they really delve into was regarding the Idris and Javelin and how they're listed with capital class shields, while the Polaris, which is a capital ship, has large shields. Now, the most simple answer to this is that the Idris and the Javelin are bigger ships, so they deserve to have bigger shields, and that's why we see them with capital class shielding. Now, with that, it also has to do with their roles. The Idris and the Javelin are meant to stand in place and deal with enemy fire. The Polaris is really meant to just take it in on attack runs. So you've got enough shielding to kind of withstand that purpose. But you also have kind of the flip side of why that's a benefit to you. Whereas like smaller shields are going to mean more capability to have greater speed and firepower. So you're kind of trading off one for the other because you get that speed and payload at the expense of not having the bigger, heavier components on board. And speaking of components, the Polaris, like I mentioned, is a smaller ship than the Idris or Javelin, so you're naturally not necessarily going to have the same amount of space inside the ship to be able to allow you to have the bigger components. Because it's not just some magical, formula that's living inside the virtual spaceship. It's actually a component that you can walk up to, you can touch, you can repair, you can upgrade. That's a part of your ship. And if you want capital class shielding, it's also going to need a capital class power plant, a capital class shield generator, and then those are going to be big and heavy, and that comes with implications. So that's our real first look at the Polaris as far as the Q&A. We should be getting another one of these tomorrow, which I'm really looking forward to. What I'm really hoping they iron out for us is the turret sizes, because like I mentioned before, the turrets are really listed at size 4. Now, if that means turret size 4, that means 2 by size 1 weapons on that. And that's really kind of silly considering, the size of the ship and what its purpose is. I'm thinking, and like Clem, one of my patrons mentioned on the Discord server, he actually dove in and started doing some comparisons about other ships on the stats page. And we all know that's kind of iffy of whether it's actually accurate or not. But it looks like, for the most part, if it's listed with size 4 weaponry, or is it size 4 turret, it actually means size 4 weapons. If it's listed at size 6 turret, it generally has size 6 weapons. So like, for example, the Gemini is listed as a size 5 turret. Well, it actually has 2 by size 5s on it. It's got the M7As. When we start talking about like the Idris and the Javelin, it's got size 6 turrets, but it actually comes with size 6 weapons. There's a lot of examples that kind of give that approach, and it kind of confirms that we think that this is going to have bigger weapons on its turrets, which I think is really important because you're going to use it on attack runs. And not outside of the fact that it's a big ship, so having size 1s or 2s on it, it's going to look silly as hell. The one part that kind of gives us a little bit of doubt is one that CIG's already, kind of admitted to making a mistake on. And that's with the Terrapin. It's listed as a size 5 on the nose, but we all know that actually means it's got 2 by size 2 weapons. And that's kind of a downer, but CIG has said that that's actually kind of a relic of when they were first designing the ship, and the stats page just wasn't listed or updated accordingly. So since that was a mistake, and we've got other examples of it being kind of following the size listed is actually the weaponry size, I feel pretty good about that, and my guess is that we're going to see size 4 weapons, and maybe it means size 4 max, and the ship actually ships out with size 3s or something like that, and you can upgrade if you want to, but I'm really hoping that gets answered in this next video. So, I appreciate you guys watching. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, have yourselves a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you guys later. Take care.